The combined fleet hung in orbit above the Vethrani homeworld, like a constellation of judgment waiting to fall. Ships from 4 different species flew in formation for the first time in galactic history with human destroyers beside the Sari intelligence. Vessels and Corman warships flanking Yilthan resource carriers. Subcommander Deho stood on the bridge of the flagship and watched the volcanic planet turn slowly below. All weapons are charged and ready. General Karath reported from his position at the tactical station. One command, and we end the Vethrani threat forever. That is not why we are here. Ambassador Quillith reminded him gently. We came to offer a choice, not to deliver an execution. The choice may not be accepted. Korath replied grimly, and we must be ready for that outcome. Matriarch Yilsena's holographic form flickered beside Deho as she monitored the situation from her distant ship. Sensors detect significant activity within the fortress. She reported, there appears to be conflict among the Vethrani themselves. Deho allowed himself a small smile. The plan was working. Open a channel to the surface. He ordered, let them know we are here to talk. The communication officer sent the signal and the fleet waited in tense silence. Below in the great hall of Thezarak, the situation remained balanced on a blade's edge. Chieftain Vorak held the struggling warlord Kezeth down while clan leaders argued about what should be done. Some called for immediate surrender, while others demanded they fight to the last warrior. Commander Yun Sejin stood at the center of the chaos with Elder Morathan and young Malice beside him. The fortress shook again as the orbiting fleet adjusted position and reminded everyone of the firepower waiting above. The fleet is hailing us. A Vethrani communications officer announced with fear evident in his voice. All eyes turned to the display screens as they flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Allied flagship. Deho's face appeared, and beside him stood representatives of all 4 Alliance species, people of the Vethrani Dominion. Deho began in a formal tone. We come not as conquerors, but as those who wish to end centuries of conflict. You come with weapons pointed at our world. Vorak replied as he rose from the subdued Kezeth. That does not feel like peace. The Voy. Weapons are a reminder of what could happen if peace fails. Deho admitted honestly, but we would prefer never to fire them. Sajin moved closer to the display and addressed his second-in-command directly. Report on the Alliance status. He requested. The coalition is holding. Deho replied with visible relief at seeing his commander alive. The Thezari have committed their intelligence networks to peaceful purposes, and the Cormant have agreed to defend rather than attack, and the Yilthan are prepared to share resources with any who join us. And humanity. Seojin asked, we will serve as mediators and bridge builders. Deho answered, as you always intended. Elder Marathan stepped forward with ancient dignity in every movement. Why would you offer peace to those who have caused such suffering? He asked the Alliance representatives. The Thesari were our slaves, and the Corman have buried countless warriors because of us, and the Yilthan have been extorted for generations. It was Ambassador Quillith who answered with pain and hope mixed in her silver features, because hatred is a chain that binds the jailer as tightly as the prisoner. She said, we could destroy you and spend the rest of our existence defined by that act of revenge, or we could break the cycle and build something new. The human commander taught us this. General Korath added with grudging respect in his deep voice. He sacrificed himself not to defeat you, but to give all of us a chance to become better than we were. The gathered Vethrani looked at Seojin with new understanding. This human had walked willingly into their den and risked death, not for conquest or revenge, but for an ideal that seemed almost impossible. Peace between those who had been enemies for centuries. Chieftain Vorak addressed the other clan leaders, who had fallen silent during the exchange. We face a choice that will define our people for generations to come. He declared, we can fight and die with honor as our traditions demand, or we can find a new kind of honor in ending the cycle of violence. our ancestors would be ashamed. One of Kezith's loyal chieftains shouted, "Our ancestors nearly destroyed our species with their desperate raids." Elder Marathon countered, "Perhaps it is time we stopped making them proud and started making our children hopeful." This argument struck deep into Vethrani hearts. They had always justified their actions as honoring the past, but the elder reminded them that the past had almost killed them. "I will negotiate," Vorak announced after a long moment of consideration, not as a sign of weakness, but as a sign that the Vethrani are wise enough to recognize when the universe has changed. Warlord Kezith screamed in rage from where he lay restrained on the floor. "Traitors!" he roared. "Cowards and traitors, all of you." "No," Seojin said as he knelt beside the fallen warlord. "They are survivors, just as your ancestors were when they faced extinction, and they are adapting to survive, just as your ancestors did. This is not survival." Kezith spat. "This is surrender. This is evolution." Seojin replied calmly, "The strong do not always destroy the weak, and sometimes the strong learn to lift others up instead of pushing them down." The negotiations that followed would be remembered in the histories of 5 species as the beginning of a new era. It was not easy, and old wounds did not heal overnight, but the foundation had been laid for something unprecedented. The Vethrani joined the coalition not as conquered subjects, but as full members with their own voice and their own responsibilities. They would use their warrior skills to defend the alliance rather than raid it. The Zari would share their intelligence networks to prevent conflicts before they started. The Cormand would provide military strength that deterred aggression from outside powers. The Ylthan would manage resources fairly so that no species would ever be desperate enough to raid others, and humanity would serve as the bridge between cultures that had never learned to trust each other. 3 months later, Commander Yun Seojin stood on a balcony overlooking the newly renamed city of New Thezarak. The volcanic mountains still glowed in the distance, but the streets below were filled with representatives from all 5 species learning to coexist. Sub-Commander Deho found him there as the twin suns began to set. "The Council has voted to make you the first ambassador of unity," Deho reported. "They want you to continue the work you started." Seojin smiled, but there was weariness behind it. "When I let myself be captured, I was not sure I would survive the first night," he admitted. "There were so many moments when everything could have fallen apart, but it did not fall apart." Deho replied, "Because you believed it was possible, even when no one else did. I believe that people want peace more than they want war." Seojin said, "I believe that even enemies can become allies if someone gives them the chance, and I believe that one person's sacrifice can change the course of history. Was it worth it?" Deho asked quietly. Seojin looked out at the city where Vethrani and the Sari walked side by side and where Corman warriors taught combat skills to young cadets of every species. "Every moment of fear, and every day in chains, and every second when I thought I would die," he answered. "Yes, it was worth it." Nalis appeared in the doorway with a message pad in her hands. She had become one of the first Vethrani to volunteer for the new Unified Diplomatic Corps' ambassador. She said with formal respect that could not hide her warm smile, "The Council is ready for you." Seojin straightened his uniform and prepared to continue the work of building peace. As he walked toward the council chamber, Deho called out one final question. "Do you really think this peace will last?" Seojin paused and considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "Peace is not a destination," he replied. "It is a choice that must be made every single day. And as long as there are people willing to make that choice, then yes, I believe it will last." He entered the chamber where 5 species waited to shape their shared future. The hunter had become the hunted. The trophy had become the teacher, and the trap had become the foundation of something the galaxy had never seen before. Unity forged not through conquest, but through one human's belief that even the fiercest enemies could become the closest friends. The great hall of Fezarek had been prepared for a celebration of blood. Torches lined the walls, casting dancing shadows across stone pillars carved with scenes of ancient Vethrani victories. Representatives from every major clan had gathered to witness what Warlord Kezith promised would be a demonstration of ultimate power. Commander Yun Seojin stood in chains at the center of the hall, with guards on either side and a sea of hostile faces surrounding him. His body ached from weeks of captivity and poor food, but his mind remained sharp as ever. He had been waiting for this moment. Kezith descended from his throne with a ceremonial blade in his hand that gleamed with cruel intent. Today, we show the galaxy what happens to those who oppose the Vethrani. The warlord announced to cheers from his supporters. This human thought he could stand against us, and now he will die as all our enemies die. Chieftain Vorak watched from across the hall with his arms crossed and suspicion in his eyes. Something about this situation felt wrong to him, though he could not identify exactly what. Elder Marthan stood near the back of the crowd with Nallis beside him. The young servant had tears in her eyes that she tried to hide. The prisoner has requested the right of final words. One of the guards announced. Kezith paused with annoyance flickering across his scaled face. The tradition was ancient, and refusing it would make him look weak before the other clans. Speak then, human, he growled, but speak quickly. Seojin lifted his head and looked not at Kezith, but at the gathered crowd. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the great hall in perfect Vethrani. I have waited many days to stand before you. He began, not as a prisoner begging for mercy, but as a messenger bringing truth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd at this unexpected opening. Your warlord believes my capture was a sign of human weakness, Seojin continued, but I allowed myself to be taken because I needed to see your fortress and your people and your divisions with my own eyes. Silence him, Kezith ordered, but the crowd pressed forward wanting to hear more. Even Vorak raised a hand to stop the guards. Let the human speak, the chieftain commanded. I would hear what truth he claims to bring. Kezith seethed, but could not contradict. Another clan leader without starting a fight, he might not win. Seojin continued with all attention fixed upon him. I have studied your people for years, and I have learned your history, including the parts you have tried to bury. He paused to let this statement sink in. 2,000 years ago, the Vethrani faced extinction, and you survived by becoming raiders and warriors, because you had no other choice. But somewhere along the way you forgot that raiding was supposed to be temporary. Elder Marthan's eyes widened as he realized what Seojin was doing. The human was exposing secrets that could shake the very foundations of Vethrani society. Now you raid because you have forgotten how to do anything else. Seojin continued. Your clans fight each other for scraps of glory, while your people grow weary of endless war, and your enemies grow stronger. We have no enemies strong enough to threaten us. Kezith shouted with anger breaking through his composure. You do now. Seojin replied calmly. The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. While I have been your prisoner, the species you have terrorized have been meeting in secret. Seojin revealed. The Visari and the Cormand and the Yulthan have formed an alliance for the first time in history, and they have done this because a human showed them it was possible. Chaos erupted in the great hall as clan leaders shouted accusations at each other. This is your fault, Kezith. Vorak roared. You captured this human, and now you have united our enemies against us. He lies. Kezith snarled back. This is a trick to divide us. Is it? Vorak challenged. Then explain how he knows about our ancient shame, and explain why you did not see this trap before you sprang it. The other chieftains began choosing sides, and the great hall transformed from a celebration into the edge of civil war. Seojin watched with grim satisfaction as the plan unfolded exactly as he had hoped, but he was not finished yet. There is still time to choose a different path." He called out over the noise. The shouting gradually died as the Vethrani turned back to the human who had caused so much disruption. "The alliance gathering against you has the power to destroy your civilization," Seojin admitted openly. 4. Species united against one cannot be defeated, but that is not what I want. What could you possibly want? Kezith demanded with hatred burning in his eyes. "I want to offer your people a choice," Seojin answered. "You can continue raiding until the combined forces of 4 species burn Tesseract to ash, or you can choose to become something other than conquerors. We are warriors." Kezith screamed. "We do not surrender." "I am not asking you to surrender," Seojin replied. "I am asking you to evolve." From her place near the back, Nalis moved without thinking. She had spent weeks listening to this human speak of peace and understanding, and she could not watch him die for words that needed to be heard. Her hands found the control panel for Seojin's chains, and she pressed the release sequence that she had memorized during her guard duties. The chains fell away, and Seojin rubbed his wrists as gasps echoed through the hall. Guards rushed forward, but Elder Marthan stepped into their path with authority that came from centuries of respect. "Hold," the elder commanded. "I would hear the rest of what this human has to say." "You dare!" Kezith exploded with rage. "You dare side with a prisoner against your own warlord." "I side with the survival of our people," Marthan replied firmly. "Something you have forgotten how to do in your pursuit of glory." The clan leaders who had been arguing moments ago now fell silent. This confrontation between warlord and elder was something none of them had expected. Seojin stepped forward with his hands raised in peace. "The fleet will arrive within hours," he announced. "They are coming to show you that resistance is futile, but they do not want to fire a single shot if there is another way." Warning alarms began to sound throughout the fortress as long-range sensors detected incoming vessels. Timing could not have been more perfect. 4 species approach your homeworld. Seojin continued. "Each one alone would be no match for your defenses, but together they are unstoppable, and they are together because of me." Kezith looked around the hall at his fractured support and the chaos he had never anticipated. His ceremonial blade trembled in his grip as he realized that everything had gone wrong. "You planned all of this," the warlord said with horror creeping into his voice. "I planned for your people to have a chance," Seojin replied. "What you do with that chance is up to you." The fortress shook as the first ships entered orbit, and every Vethrani present understood that their world was about to change forever. Whether it changed through peace or fire depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Kezith raised his blade and charged at Seojin with murderous intent, but Chieftain Varric was faster, the rival. Leader tackled Kezith to the ground, and the 2 warriors struggled as their followers watched in shock. "Enough," Vorak shouted as he pinned the warlord down. "Enough blood and enough war." Elder Marthan moved to stand beside Seojin with Nalis close behind. "The human speaks truth," the elder announced to the gathered clans. "We have been so busy conquering others that we have forgotten who we were meant to be." The hall fell into uncertain silence as the Vethrani faced a decision that would define their future: continue fighting and face certain destruction, or take the hand extended by an enemy and become something new. The choice hung in the air like smoke from the torches, and Commander Yun Seojin waited to see which path they would choose. The meeting station hung in the darkness between stars, where no government claimed territory and no patrol ships ever ventured. It was the perfect place for enemies to become allies. Ambassador Thiessen Quillith arrived first, as was proper for the species that had suffered longest under Vethrani oppression. The Dazari were slender beings with skin like polished silver and 4 delicate arms that moved with graceful precision. For 800 years, they had served as slaves and information gatherers for the Vethrani clans. Their intelligence networks spanned the galaxy, but they had never dared to use that knowledge for their own freedom. Until now, General Korath arrived next with a guard of 6 Corpsman warriors whose massive forms filled the small docking bay. The Corpsmen were built for war with thick armored hides and tusks that could pierce steel. They had fought the Vethrani in countless border skirmishes and lost more warriors than any other species. Their hatred burned hot, but their numbers had dwindled with each passing decade. Matriarch Yelsenna came last with quiet dignity that belied the power she held. The Yelfen were ancient beings whose crystalline bodies contained minds that could calculate probabilities. Across centuries, they controlled vital resources that the Vethrani demanded through threats and extortion. Alone, each species was too weak to resist. Together, they might finally have a chance. But first, they had to learn to trust each other. I do not see why we need the humans involved in this matter. General Korath growled as the 4 representatives took seats around a circular table. They are newcomers to this region, and they do not understand our struggles. The humans sent the message that brought us here, Ambassador Quillith pointed out with diplomatic patience. Without them, we would still be suffering in isolation. The Thesari have always been quick to serve new masters. Korath shot back with deliberate cruelty. Quillith's silver skin flushed with anger, but she held her tongue. This was exactly the kind of division that had kept them weak for centuries. Perhaps we should hear from the human representative before we tear each other apart. Matriarch Yelsenna suggested in her crystalline voice that chimed like distant bells. All eyes turned to the 5th seat, where Subcommander Deho sat with his hands folded calmly on the table. He had spent the journey here preparing for this moment, but nothing could have truly readied him for the weight of responsibility he now carried. My commander sacrificed his freedom to bring you together. Deho began in a steady voice. He allowed himself to be captured and taken into the heart of Vethrani power because he believed that you deserved the chance to fight back. One human prisoner changes nothing, Korath argued. The fortress of Thezarek has never been breached. That is true. Deho agreed. From the outside, it is impenetrable, but Commander Seojin is not trying to breach it from the outside. He activated a holographic display that showed detailed schematics of the Vethrani fortress. For 3 years, my commander studied the Vethrani. Deho explained. He learned their language and their culture and their weaknesses, and he discovered that their greatest vulnerability is not in their walls, but in their unity. The display shifted to show the political structure of the Vethrani. Clans with lines of rivalry and hatred connecting the major power centers. They are divided against themselves. Quillith observed with new understanding in her voice. We always assumed they were a unified force. That assumption is exactly what they wanted you to believe. Deho confirmed. The clans compete constantly for status and resources, and the only thing holding them together is the success of their raids. So if we threaten them enough, they will unite against us. Korath concluded grimly. This plan seems designed to make them stronger. No, Deho countered. If we threaten them the right way, they will turn on each other, trying to assign blame for the failure. Matriarch Yelsenna's crystalline form pulsed with calculation as she processed this information. The human commander intends to create a crisis from within while we apply pressure from without. She summarized. The Vethrani will face enemies on all sides, including within their own ranks. Exactly. Deho said with relief that someone understood. But this plan requires all of you to work together, and I know that will not be easy. Silence fell over the table as old grievances and fresh wounds competed with the hope of freedom. Korath spoke first, with bitterness heavy in his words. The Thesari provided intelligence to the Vethrani that led to the massacre of my brothers. Battalion, he said. How can I trust them now? We provided that intelligence because they held our children hostage. Quillith responded with pain in her voice. Every piece of information we gave them cost us something precious. There is always a choice. There is always a choice. Korath spat. Is there? Quillith demanded as her composure cracked. Would you have let them kill 10,000? The sorry children to save your soldiers, because that was the choice we faced every single day. The corpsman general had no answer. For this, his people had never faced such impossible decisions, because they had always chosen to fight openly. We have all been victims. Yeltsin said gently, the Vethrani have taken from each of us and turned our suffering into weapons against each other, but that ends now if we choose to let it end. Deho pulled out a small recording device and placed it on the table. Before his capture, Commander Seojin asked me to play this for you if the Alliance seemed about to fail. He pressed the activation button and Seojin's voice filled the room. If you are hearing this, then you are arguing about the past instead of planning for the future. The recording said, I understand because humans did the same thing for thousands of years, and we nearly destroyed ourselves with our divisions before we learned to look forward instead of backward. The representatives listened in silence as the human commander continued. Each of you has been hurt, and each of you has reasons not to trust the others. But I am asking you to do something that humans have learned is the hardest thing in the universe. There was a pause in the recording. Before Seojin spoke again, I am asking you to forgive, not forget, because we should never forget the lessons of the past, but forgive because holding on to hatred only gives the Vethrani more power over you. Right now I am sitting in a cell waiting to be executed because I believe that you could become something greater than your pain, and if I was wrong, then my death will mean nothing. But if I was right, then everything changes today. The recording ended and silence returned to the room. General Korath's massive hands were clenched into fists on the table. Ambassador Qualaith's silver skin had gone pale with emotion. Matriarch Yeltsin's crystalline form hummed with frequencies that her species used to express deep feeling. Yeltsin's crystalline form hummed with frequencies that her species used to express deep feeling. Apacheris, a steep feeling. Yeltsin's crystalline form hummed with frequencies that her species used to express. Human is willing to die for our freedom, Korath finally said in a voice that had lost its anger. And we sit here fighting over old wounds while he waits in chains. The question is simple. Quilith added, do we deserve the sacrifice he has made for us? Yeltsin extended one crystalline limb toward the center of the table. The Yulthans stand with this alliance, she declared. After a long moment, Quilith placed her silver hand beside the matriarch's limb. Do the Sari stand with this alliance? She said. Korath stared at the two hands for what felt like an eternity before his massive paw came down beside them. The Cormans stand with this alliance, he growled, and may the ancestors forgive us if we fail. Deho added his human hand to the others and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Then let us plan, he said, because Commander Seojin is running out of time. The fortress city of Thezarek rose from volcanic mountains like the skeleton of some ancient beast. Black stone towers reached toward a crimson sky, while rivers of molten rock flowed through channels carved centuries ago by Vethrani architects. Commander Yun Seojin studied every detail as the transport ship descended toward the landing platforms. His hands remained bound, but his eyes were free to learn. The Vethrani had built their stronghold to be impenetrable from the outside with walls thick enough to withstand orbital bombardment and defensive systems that could destroy entire fleets. But Seojin was not looking for weaknesses in the walls. He was looking for something far more valuable. He was looking for cracks in the Vethrani themselves. The ship landed with a heavy thud and warriors dragged Seojin down the ramp into the harsh sunlight of the Vethrani homeworld. Warlord Kezith walked ahead with his chest swelled in pride as crowds of Vethrani citizens gathered to see the human prisoner. They pointed and hissed, and some threw small stones that bounced harmlessly off Seojin's back. He did not react to their hatred. Instead, he watched how they looked at Kezith, and he saw something interesting. Not all eyes held admiration. Some Vethrani in the crowd wore expressions of weariness and worry that spoke of something deeper than simple war fatigue. These people were tired of endless conflict. Even if they could not say so openly, Seojin filed this observation. Away for later use, the procession wound through narrow streets, carved from black stone, until they reached a massive structure that served as both palace and prison. Inside the torch-lit halls, Seojin was brought before a gathering of Vethrani elites who had come to see the famous human trophy. Among them stood a tall figure whose armor bore different markings than Kezith's clan. This was Chieftain Varric, and the tension between him and Kezith was visible even to an outsider. You bring a single human and call it a great victory, Varric said with contempt dripping from every word. My clan has captured dozens of prisoners more valuable than this. This one is a commander of their military forces. Kezith growled back with barely controlled anger. His capture proves that humans are weak and ripe for conquest, or it proves that you have made us a powerful enemy. Varric countered. The humans have never organized against us before, but taking one of their leaders may change that. Seojin listened to this argument with great interest. The Vethrani were not unified at all. They were divided into rival clans that competed constantly for power and status. This was exactly what he had hoped to find. Guards took Seojin to a cell deep within the fortress, where chains anchored to the walls replaced his energy restraints. A small window let in dim red light. From the volcanic glow outside, he sat on the cold stone floor and began to wait. The first visitor came that very night. She was young for a Vethrani, with scales still bright and unmarked by battle. Her name was Nalis, and she had been assigned to bring food and water to the prisoner. She placed the tray on the floor and prepared to leave without speaking, but Seojin's voice stopped her. Your fortress is beautiful, he said in simple Vethrani that he had spent years learning. Nalis turned back with shock, widening her glowing eyes. You speak our language, she said with wonder she could not hide. I have studied your people for a long time, Seojin replied calmly. I wanted to understand you before I came here, before you were captured. Nalis corrected him. Seojin only smiled at this. Nalis should have left immediately, but curiosity kept her feet planted. Why would a human want to understand us? She asked. We are your enemies. Are you? Seojin asked back. Or are we simply two peoples who have never truly spoken to each other? This question confused Nalis so deeply that she fled the cell without another word. But she returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time she stayed a little longer and asked a few more questions. Seojin answered every one with patience and honesty. He told her about human worlds and human dreams and human fears. He asked her about Vethrani art and Vethrani music and Vethrani children. Nalis had never imagined that a prisoner would care about such things. On the fourth night, another visitor came. This one was old, with scales faded to a dull gray and eyes that held centuries of wisdom. Elder Morthan moved slowly, but his mind remained sharp as any blade. The young servant speaks of nothing but you, Morthan said as he settled onto a bench near Seojin's chains. She says you ask about our culture with genuine interest. I do, Seojin confirmed. Your people have survived great hardships and built an impressive civilization, but I wonder if you remember what you almost lost. Morthan's eyes narrowed at this. What do you know of our history? The elder demanded. I know that 2,000 years ago the Vethrani faced extinction, Seojin replied. A plague destroyed nearly 90% of your population, and the survivors turned to raiding because they had no other way to survive. Morthan sat in stunned silence. Few outsiders knew this shameful secret that the Vethrani had buried under layers of warrior pride. The raiding was never supposed to become permanent. Seojin continued gently, but somewhere along the way your people forgot how to do anything else. And now you cannot stop, even though it is destroying you from within. You see much for a prisoner, Morthan admitted grudgingly. I see that. Your clans fight each other almost as much as they fight outsiders. Seojin said, I see that Kezith and Varak hate each other enough to tear this fortress apart, and I see that the endless wars have left your people exhausted. Morathan stood and walked to the small window, where volcanic light painted his old face in shades of red. What is it that you want, human? He asked without turning around. I want to give your people a choice, Seojin answered. A chance to become something other than raiders and conquerors before it is too late. Too late for what? Morathan asked. The species you have terrorized are finally beginning to talk to each other. Seojin revealed. Not because of diplomacy or treaties, but because of me. Morathan turned back with alarm flashing across his features. My capture was not an accident. Seojin explained. It was an invitation, and right now representatives from the Visari and the Cormond and the Ylfin are meeting in secret because a human showed them that unity is possible. You used yourself as bait. Morathan realized with something like awe in his voice. Someone had to prove that the Vethrani could be challenged, Seojin said, and someone had to be inside these walls when the challenge comes. Morathan stared at the human prisoner who had willingly walked into chains to start a revolution. You are either the bravest being I have ever met, the elder said slowly, or the most foolish. Perhaps I am both, Seojin admitted. But the galaxy is about to change, and your people will have to decide which side of that change they want to stand on. The old Vethrani left without another word, but Seojin knew that seeds had been planted. Now he could only hope they would grow in time. The raid came at dawn when the twin suns of Kepler Station cast long shadows across the frontier outpost Commander Yun. Seojin stood at the observation window and watched the Vethrani warships descend through the orange sky like massive predatory birds hunting for prey. He had been waiting for this moment for 3 long years. The alarm screamed throughout the station, and colonists ran for the underground shelters, while security teams scrambled to defensive positions. Sub-Commander Deho rushed into the command center with panic written across his face. Commander, we need to evacuate you immediately, Deho said as he grabbed Seojin's arm. Seojin did not move from the window. How many ships? He asked in a voice that carried no fear. 12 assault vessels and 1 command cruiser, Deho reported with urgency in his tone. We cannot hold against that force, and you know this. Seojin finally turned to face his second-in-command, and there was something strange in his eyes that Deho had never seen before. It looked almost like satisfaction. I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you, Seojin said as he placed both hands on Deho's shoulders. You will take the colonists through the emergency tunnels to the backup landing site, and you will not look back. I will not leave you here, Deho protested with fierce loyalty. You will because I am ordering you to do so, Seojin replied firmly, and because everything depends on what happens in the next hour. The station shook as the first Vethrani boarding pods crashed through the outer hall. Seojin walked to his desk and pulled out a small device that looked like an ordinary communicator, but was something far more important. He pressed a sequence of buttons and spoke a single phrase into the receiver. The hunter becomes the hunted only when the prey learns to stand together. The message transmitted instantly to coordinates that Deho did not recognize. What was that? Deho demanded with confusion overwhelming his training. Insurance. Seojin answered simply. Now go and protect our people, because that is your duty from this moment forward. Deho wanted to argue, but the look in his commander's eyes told him that this was not a debate. Something much larger than a simple raid was happening here, and Seojin had planned for it. I will find you, Deho swore as he backed toward the emergency exit. I am counting on it, Seojin said with a slight smile. But not too soon and not alone. Deho disappeared into the corridor, and Seojin turned back to face the door as the sounds of battle grew closer. The Vethrani were fearsome warriors with scaled skin the color of dried blood and eyes that glowed with an inner fire. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, and their culture revolved around conquest and the collection of trophies from defeated enemies. For 50 years, they had terrorized this region of space and raided colonies from a dozen different species. No alliance had ever formed against them because the Vethrani were masters at keeping their victims isolated and afraid. That was about to change. The command center doors exploded inward, and 6 Vethrani warriors poured through with plasma rifles raised. Seojin stood calmly with his hands visible and empty. The lead warrior stopped in surprise at finding a human who showed no fear. This one does not run. The warrior observed with what might have been respect. I am Commander Yun Seojin of the Human Coalition, Seojin announced in a clear voice, and I surrender myself to your custody. The warriors exchanged glances that revealed their confusion. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as stubborn fighters who never surrendered easily. This behavior did not match what they had been taught. Take him alive, ordered a deep voice from the doorway. The warriors parted to reveal a massive Vethrani whose armor was decorated with the bones and teeth of countless conquered enemies. This was Warlord Kezith, leader of the largest raiding clan and the most feared name in 3-star systems. Kezith approached Seojin with slow, deliberate steps and studied the human with burning orange eyes. You surrender without a fight, Kezith observed. This is either great wisdom or great cowardice. Perhaps it is neither, Seojin replied as he met the warlord's gaze without flinching. Kezith laughed, and the sound echoed like thunder in the damaged command center. I like this one, the warlord declared to his warriors. A human commander will make a fine trophy for my collection, and the other clans will see our power when I display him in chains. The warriors bound Seojin's hands with energy restraints that bit painfully into his wrists as they led him through the burning station toward the Vethrani ships. Seojin saw the bodies of fallen defenders and felt the weight of their sacrifice. This plan had cost lives already, and it would cost more before the end. But the alternative was far worse. The Vethrani would continue raiding forever unless someone found a way to stop them, and the only way to stop them was to unite every species they had ever wronged into a single force that could not be defeated. No human fleet could accomplish this alone. No diplomatic mission could bring together species that had been kept apart by fear and mistrust for generations. But a single human willing to become a prisoner might just change everything. Seojin was pushed into a transport vessel and thrown to the floor as Kezith's warriors celebrated their easy victory. They did not notice the small smile that crossed Seojin's face as the ship lifted off 3 light years away. The message he had sent reached its first destination. A Thesari communications officer sat up in shock as the coded transmission appeared on her screen. She had never heard of Commander Yun Seojin, but the encryption he used was one that only the highest levels of Thesari intelligence could decode. The message was short, but its meaning was clear. Someone was finally willing to do what needed to be done. The officer immediately forwarded the message to Ambassador Thiessen Quillith, who had spent her entire career dreaming of freedom from Vethrani oppression. Within hours, the same message reached the Corpsman Military Command and the Yulthan Council of Matriarchs. 3 species who had never trusted each other suddenly found themselves looking at the same words. The hunter becomes the hunted only when the prey learns to stand together on the Vethrani command ship. Kezith stood before his prisoner with triumph blazing in his eyes. You will be taken to Thezarak, the warlord announced. Our fortress city, where no enemy has ever set foot except in chains, and from there, you will never leave. Seojin looked up at his captor with an expression that Kezith could not quite understand. I look forward to seeing it, the human said quietly. Kezith frowned at this strange response, but dismissed it as the desperate bravado of a defeated enemy he could not possibly know that he had just invited destruction into the heart of his empire. The trap had been set, and the bait had been taken. Now the real work would begin.